this is deliberately happening off the balance sheets of the big tech companies. They say we actually don't want this consolidated. You've seen Meta do some off-balance sheet financing of data centers. You know, a lot of Oracle's liabilities are these sort of leases that sort of aren't if you squint at them, they certainly look like debt. I'm just curious, like, where you think the weakness is in what is being heavily financialized.
Look, you know, these aren't, you know, necessarily operating businesses they're financing. They've got them in off-balance sheet. They lever them up to the hilt. They don't reevaluate their position. It's really hard to get a look into them. You know, a tremendous amount of exposure. They don't put it, you know, off-balance sheet unintentionally. It's there so that they can, you know, basically put bookends, corners around that liability. So when the proverbial, you know, shit hits the fan, that it protects, you know, their balance sheet. So when I see that, you know, then to me, that's just another red flag when you look at these companies. Whenever they have off-balance sheet assets, they can protect themselves, but ultimately there's going to be some downstream impacts to those investments.
Let's spend a minute on FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried, you know, argued after he was charged that the company was solvent, and with the benefit of hindsight, that grab bag of investments was money good, and that it could have made the company solvent. It did in fact have a stake in Anthropic that you sold for I think about $900 million in 2024, would certainly be worth more today. And when you looked at that pile of investments, which some of which are household names now that I had never heard of, certainly when we were covering this, anything you do differently?
Look, I mean, we were not a long-term, you know, hedge fund. We were a company that had hundreds of thousands of creditors worldwide, looking for recovery, and we couldn't just, you know, dividend out a fractional share of Anthropic, right? You had to monetize it like many of the other assets we have, convert that to cash, distribute the cash out. At the time we did that, I mean, it's total with the government recovery from the sale of their interest in Anthropic, which was forfeiture money, plus our sales. You know, we picked up a couple $2 billion. But we're bankrupt. We're a bankrupt entity, and our job is to convert, you know, assets into cash to distribute out to creditors. We can't operate in a world where we don't have an Investment Company Act. We can't just distribute out assets in kind to people. You know, bankruptcy is expensive. Crime is expensive. You know, and so, yeah, obviously, you know, there was a massive increase in the value of that asset. You know, could you have seen that 3 years ago? We knew it was, you know, a quadruple, maybe 6 times for us in terms of what we actually had invested. Having said that, I mean, we still hold like 400 other investments he made with a cost basis in the billions of dollars, and we're trying to work through that portfolio, and the liquidity on that, you know, just isn't, you don't have the clarity to that. We were fortunate enough to have a piece of a SpaceX, which we have not sold. And
you'll have a chance this spring if all goes according to
plan
on the IPO.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the IPO, and hopefully that goes off well. But that's, you know, obviously an attractive asset for us. But we're doing fine. We've distributed out 100 cents to creditors. These are at petition date values, with the benefit of the CFTC suppressing $4 billion worth of their claims, the IRS subordinating, you know, billions of dollars of their claims. So we had a lot of cooperation from governments that otherwise would have seized those assets. So it's been really beneficial to get that done. But we've got a little bit of way to go. I mean, we've distributed 100 cents. Our bankruptcy plan was much more ambitious to that, and so we're working towards that.
Do you think he deserves a pardon? He's clearly looking for one.
You know, I'm not going to comment on that. I mean, I made my thoughts known in his sentencing hearing, and I will say this much. I mean, you know, we're all human. I feel sorry for him. I still feel sorry for the situation he put himself in. But it is what it is, and I think, you know, unfortunately, he'll just have to figure that out.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, okay. Great. Thanks.
Please welcome Senator Tim Sheehy and Burgess Everett of Semafor.
Afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Sheehy. I'm not Tim Sheehy. I'm Burgess Everett, Congressional Bureau Chief for Semafor. This is Tim Sheehy, the junior senator from Montana. And just a warning for anyone that might disrupt the proceedings. I can't guarantee he won't stop it himself. For those that don't know, he helped eject a demonstrator from a Senate hearing recently. Was that like the most exciting moment as a senator so far, or not quite?
There's been a couple others, but I guess it wasn't really exciting. I just had to get it done. So.
Would you have done it again in the same position?
Yeah, you know, as I tell everybody, I don't care who they're protesting for when they're attacking our Capitol Police. Punching our cops. I'm gonna help them out.
Yeah. So, Senator, you fought overseas for our country. What do you think of the status of the Iran war right now? Has this been a success? Are we on the way to success, or do you have issues with the way this has been prosecuted?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, taking off my military hat and putting my politician hat on, when you're a military officer, I was a team leader, you're given your directives, you carry it out, whether you agree, disagree, have ideological diversion or not, you carry out the mission, you execute, you try to bring your team home alive. Obviously, I'm in a different role now, so my job is to evaluate those challenges and those ethical, political, geopolitical concerns. But I think it's so important we zoom out. I don't want to go on a 20-minute history of Iran here, but I think, in this social media clickbait world we're in, everything is, we want 5-second gratification, we want instant explanation, we want everything in context delivered to us in a 20-second soundbite, and then we want to make a decision in our minds and move on and take a position. And ideally for ourselves, we want that position to reinforce what we already believe. And the truth is, the specific conflict with Iran, it's not just a 47-year problem. The Persian-Arab conflict goes back thousands of years. And I say Persian-Arab because that's really what it is. It's not even Sunni-Shia. It's not Israel and Arab. It's not even America or Iran. I mean, this goes back thousands of years to the tension between the Persian Empire and the Arab states. And of course, as the Jewish problem for the Arabs grew over the last centuries and of course the last decades acutely, this is a far more complex problem than the average American has been led to believe and spoon-fed, especially in these past 43 days. But as someone who spent significant time in the region, several tours there, been to every single country that is at issue right now, the simple fact is Iran is the largest state-sponsored terror in the world. They've been the largest contributor to global instability for the last half century. Whether it's exporting murder and terror through Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi rebels, or whether it's directly funding other extremist groups and terrorist attacks against American citizens, or whether it's providing back-end support to Russia for the war in Ukraine with drone technology and the GPS denial guidance technology, or of course providing discounted cheap oil to China for decades. Iran is not our friend. Their foreign policy has been death to America for 47 years. They want to kill everyone in this room. They want to kill everyone in this country. That's their statement, and you can believe it because every time they've had a chance to do so, they have done so. With machetes, with machine guns, with bombs, with rockets, with missiles, they want our way of life gone. So I think this can has been kicked by 6 presidents. Bipartisan. We've allowed this problem to fester and grow, and President Trump has decided he's not going to pass this problem to a 4th generation of young Americans who have grappled with this issue. So if you had to go back and rewind, I think 2 months and tell any 4-star, 3-star, 2-star military officer or any civilian defense planner that at 43 days into this conflict, we would have no Iranian Navy, no Iranian Air Force, no functional ability to project power around the region, that all you'd have was spasms of a dying regime. If the definition of winning this war was managing the collapse of a murderous theocratic regime, I think they'd say, no, that's way too optimistic. That's going to take a year. So in direct answer to your question, I think the campaign is going very well. In the same amount of time during the first Gulf War, the 100-hour war, I might add, 100 hours we took out Saddam's army in 1991. Over 43 days, which is roughly the same we're at now, of combat sorties, we lost 45 U.S. aircraft to enemy fire. 45 American planes were shot down by the Iraqi Air Force. We've lost 1 directly with its air crew this time. Yes, we had some friendly fire incidents, we had mechanical incident, but as far as the bad guys shooting down an American plane and taking out our air crew, which we rescued, by the way, 1 plane. So for all of the negativity that I think is driven by a lot of the political distaste for our president, I think it's been a very unfair characterization of what our military has executed and how it's been carried out.
What about the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz? Iran was blockading it, and now it sounds like the U.S. is going to blockade it. Do you see that working out? Is this a similar strategy to what we were trying to do in Cuba and maybe even Venezuela?
Absolutely. I mean, these are tied together, and I think that's another important issue that hasn't been given fair airtime for really anybody, is zooming out again and placing the Iranian conflict and this challenge in the context of larger geopolitical players. The Venezuela move was not unrelated to Iran. The cheap sanctioned oil that allowed Venezuela and Iran to fund the ghost fleet, the shadow fleet, the underwater, I should say underground global oil trade that allowed Russia and China to dodge sanctions, that provides 93% of China's discounted oil, literally buying oil at cents on the dollar. China loved the status quo of a sanctioned Iran and a sanctioned Venezuela because that gave them guaranteed access to a captive oil market where they knew they'd get cheap product exclusively for them. So this isn't just about defeating Islamic extremists. This isn't just about taking out a socialist narco-trafficking dictator in South America. This is about removing linchpins that are upholding a world order where this administration is accused of being nice to Xi and nice to Putin, yet we've taken out the two satellite states that exist as the primary economic drivers of their global discounted energy. So these are absolutely connected. I think your specific question about blockading the straits is a pretty awesome judo move when you have their primary leverage. Let's be clear, when Iran declares we're going to close the straits, that's the equivalent of them going nuclear, because thank God they don't have nukes, because if they did, they would be using them. When they launch all their missiles to the nearest areas of free people living to try to destroy them, if you don't think that they had nukes, they'd put them on the tip of those missiles, you're absolutely wrong. They would. Their equivalent of going nuclear is closing the straits. It's not their power move, it's their only move. And therefore they did that quickly because their regime was dismantled so rapidly and so effectively. So us taking that off the table saying, actually, no, we're going to close it. And the reason we're going to close it is we're going to demine it, we're going to secure it, and we're going to make it safe for passage is a pretty slick move.
Do you think that, as a senator, you owe it to the service members here to vote to authorize this war? I mean, why haven't we seen that? And do you think that we should do that? I know some senators have been talking about doing an authorization of military force. I haven't seen one since Syria, and that didn't succeed. That was 13 years ago.
And every time this is brought up, I don't criticize the people bringing it up. I say, listen, this is the constitutional role of Congress. If you go back to our founding days, I'm not going to get into a constitutional history discussion, but I mean, the Congress of the United States, since the founding of this country, has viciously argued over almost every single military conflict we had. In fact, my state, Montana, the only person to vote against World War II was the at-large congressional representative for the state of Montana, Janet Rankin, who, by the way, was the first woman in Congress, who was a female member of Congress before women could vote. So kind of an interesting history there, and tying to my current seat. So I don't fault anybody for saying, listen, I think we should vote on this. I will vote against it. I will vote for us to continue for the simple reason that, we've been in...
Would you vote for an authorization of military force?
Of course, yes. If we had an authorization, but that's not what's being offered. What's being offered is, of course, a resolution to end the campaign.
But there's an alternative that you could vote to authorize it, to say we do back this as a Congress. And it sounds like you would be comfortable doing that. Yeah. How come that hasn't happened? There is the War Powers Resolution, which says 60 days plus 30-day withdrawal period. You might have to vote on this. Do you think that will happen?
I think that's not ideal because then you're simply telegraphing to your enemy, hey, hold out for 60 days, batten down the hatches, save your missiles for 60 days, and then once it's over, we'll start fighting again. So we've unfortunately as a nation gone to war hundreds of times over the course of our history. We've only declared war 5 times. You can say that's right or wrong. We can argue over the validity there, but Thomas Jefferson set the precedence for this conflict when he was threatened by an Islamic caliphate who was closing a vital seaway and kidnapping Americans and murdering Americans and seizing global shipping. And that was the Barbary Pirates, satellite state of the Ottoman Empire. And our first foreign military expedition was a non-congressionally authorized punitive expedition of the Navy and Marines sailing to the north coast of Africa and taking out the Barbary pirate states who at that point had been debilitating global shipping through the Straits of Gibraltar in North Africa. So, for a lot of the talk of this, there's no precedent, there's no congressional authorization. The truth is, Thomas Jefferson himself, set the precedent that there will be times when the commander-in-chief, who's the commander-in-chief of the military, will have to act decisively in the interest of the country. And I believe in this case, this threat has not been a partisan threat. This threat has bedeviled presidents and administrations of both parties. It's bedeviled free people all over the world for decades. And I'm happy that we're finally seeing it dealt with head on.
And let me just ask you real quick, what is the status of sending more money to the military? That's something you guys did last year. We keep hearing about it, that there's going to be a supplemental request. It hasn't come yet. Is that going to happen soon?
I think it will. There's been kind of rumors of a $200 billion supplemental, specifically for Iran. Of course, we're all hearing about the $1.5 trillion defense budget for next year as well. That's a separate issue. But as far as funding the military, I think we're going to see both those budget requests come through. And I think that's where the real debate will happen. It won't be the authorizations or the resolutions. It'll be who's going to pay to continue to fund and finish this campaign and who's not.
And you don't think Democrats will go along with this, do you?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So it's just a Republican bill?
Most likely.
Okay. Senator Sheehy, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Yep,
Appreciate
thank
it.
Please welcome Henry Ward of Carter and Matthew Martin of Semafor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Henry, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
To begin with, so you, at Carter, you have a great window into the cap tables of some of the biggest and most well-known and most rapidly growing private companies in the world. Give us a sense of, as you look at those companies, how are they doing right now? What is the fundraising environment?
Companies are raising unbelievable amounts of money. I think we're at something like last report Peter did, our data guy, something like 50% more total funding. We're on track for 50% more total funding this year than 2023. But the head count is actually declining of these companies. Like they're not hiring. And I think the dollars raised per employee now, I think, is almost 2x what it was in 22 and 23.
And is that a function of people using AI more, or is that a function of just more discipline in how people are spending money?
I think it's the extreme the extreme outliers of these startups that are just raising huge amounts of capital, in part because they have to pay for it, for tokens and all these things. So they're more CapEx intensive than they used to be. Where our biggest cost structure, in the 2010s was like cloud compute, which wasn't that much. It's all people was the problem. And now we actually have people payroll competing with tokens. And so you have to raise a lot more money on a per head count basis. I don't see any end to that in sight. Like, we're just spending more on tokens. I mean, if you look at the Anthropic graphs, it's not even nonlinear. It's like vertical on token spend.
Yeah. And so how are these private businesses now looking at the idea of going public and weighing up how long they stay private and at what point they go public? Because we're seeing IPO markets opening up now. Is that encouraging people to start going out?
I don't know if they're opening up yet. I think everyone's waiting for SpaceX. I don't know anything, but I think you'll be waiting a long time. Like, it just doesn't feel like, why? What's the reason? I don't think there's any reason for companies to go public if you're doing well in the private markets. Right now, private valuations are almost 2x what you see in public. Like, you're able to find, there's no shortage of capital in the private markets today. And prices are much better in the private market. So I think the traditional view is if a company had a good IPO, it would just like open the window for IPOs. I don't think that's been true since 2021. And I actually wonder if structurally that's actually going to change, because the sort of currency, access to capital, all of the things that you said were the reasons to go public, the best companies don't need that. They're getting it in the private markets.
Yeah. And what role do you think that Carter has in, and the other thing for going public, of course, is liquidity. What role do you have in giving liquidity to private companies?
Yeah, so the dominant form of liquidity in private companies is the tender offer, and it's usually on the backs of financing. So, for example, a company raises a $200 million Series C. They have $300 million of demand. If they'll take the 200 because they don't want 300, it's too much dilution, and they'll let that 100 million of excess demand feed into the employees or early investors, and that's the dominant liquidity product. And it's dominant because it solves all the problems that exist in public markets that CEOs don't like, which is, I know the price before I enter it. I can do a many sellers to one or two buyers. I know who the buyers are, and they're already shareholders by definition because they led the primary round. So we do a ton of that. That's been scaling a lot in the last year and a half. We'll continue to. I think that's going to continue to scale. I think the IPO sort of readiness. The pitch for Carta has always been path to IPO. 2 founders and a dog, sign up on Carta and let's go, and we'll help you get all the way to IPO. And when you're ready to go public, we'll send you the New York Stock Exchange, we'll send you to Morgan Stanley for public administration and cap table management, and we're everything in between. And that continues to be true. We now have a huge backlog of what I would describe as IPO-ready companies that we're talking to every day about IPO prep and getting ready. But there's I think there's a big jump from we're ready, or we could be ready to go, do we actually want to go? I think everyone's looking at this as an option versus an eventuality.
And so what are the things that are putting people off going now?
I think when I would come to speak here at Congress or sometimes testify, they'll say how do you get more companies to go public? And the conventional wisdom is a regulatory problem. There's too much regulation that goes into it. And I don't, as a person that is in this pre-IPO camp, when I weigh the possibility of going public, regulation has nothing to do with it. Even if they're the cost is too expensive, $1 million a year in there's nothing. In fact, if a company has to worry about $1 million a year regulatory costs, they shouldn't go public. That's a negative selection bias. The real reason is that the public markets can be super punitive if a company missteps, particularly a smaller one. And it's scary out there. If I make a mistake, just my board knows. If I have a bad quarter, just my board knows and my major investors, and I can call all of them and talk to them and explain what's going on and say, believe in me. We're working on something. It's coming back. I can have the personal relationships that I need to get through the rough patches. And there's a lot of rough patches in any business. And in the public markets, you make a misstep, or somebody vibe coded a CRM, and suddenly your market cap gets destroyed. And how do you explain on CNBC, this is ridiculous. It is so stupid that AI is going to replace Salesforce, which it is, but nobody listens. And so I think that's the problem to solve, is the public markets are a very harsh shareholder base.
Yeah. And also on this point around, this kind of relates to liquidity. I know you're doing some work around 401ks and getting equity from employee options to be eligible. Can you tell us about where are you on that? How quickly do you want to see something happen on that, and how significant is it going to be for Carter's business if it goes ahead? Yeah,
so I'm spending all day on the Hill tomorrow pitching. I think we're getting close. If people are listening. So here's my pitch to all of you. So in the U.S., of course, we have this 401k savings retirement. The way it works is, I think it's up to $25,000 a year. I'm able to take some of my salary and divert it into my 401k for retirement. If you're a startup or tech employee, your compensation is actually 2 components: cash and equity. And usually, I will take less cash to get equity in the company. Only cash is available to go into the 401k. And we think the equity should be, because it is part of your compensation, just like the cash. And it would be such a great thing for employees that instead of taking $25,000 out of cash today that I can use to pay my bills, and I have to take this equity that won't be liquid for a decade maybe, could I just take some of that equity and put it in my 401k and let it sit there? Because the 401k container is a long duration container, and private stock is a long duration asset. And so the counter argument, of course, is, well, it's risky, all this kind of stuff. The problem is you already took the risk. It's compensation. You didn't go out and invest retirement money. You were given it. You already have exposure to this. Let me just put it in a 401k so that I can let it accrue for my retirement tax deferred. And so we're making a lot of progress. I'll be on the Hill all day tomorrow telling the story. Feel free to come join me. We'll have picket signs and everything.
And how do you separate this, or is your goal to separate this from the broader debate about private investment in 401ks?
So for me, I'm supportive of private investment in 401ks. I do think one of the things that's missing from a lot of the accredited investor stuff, and I was here last year speaking to the finance committee about accredited investor and democratizing access. There is a misconception about, again, this is the regulators have a story around, IPOs are too expensive, right? That's a partisan statement, but I don't think it's actually what's happening on the ground level. Similarly, this like democratization of access to open AI, like everybody should be able to invest in AI, and they can't because of the accredited investor rule. You know, you have to be rich or something to do it. The thing is like, let's say we just got rid of it today. You're still not going to get to invest in open AI. That you can't invest in open AI not because of the accredited investor rule. You can't invest because they get to pick their shareholders, and they don't want most people to invest in the company. And that is a function of the private markets. You know, in the public markets, they created a rule-based system where everyone was equal. In the private markets, they did exactly the opposite, which is by law, you can't ask somebody to invest in your company unless you personally know them. And so if you create democratization of that, how do you personally know everybody? And so if they really want to fix access, you have to fix the network law, the networking law. If I can only raise private capital from people I personally know.
And just as a final point, what is on the cards for Carter Future now? How are you thinking about your own fundraising needs? And also, is an IPO of the business on the cards?
We're all in now in private equity and private credit. If you want to know like Carter's next chapter, we've had a lot of success sort of building the infrastructure for venture capital. We now want to see if we can replicate that in the private equity and private credit world. We're spending all our time there. We're profitable, which is crazy. It took me 12 years, 172 consecutive months, unbroken of losing money. I broke, which is crazy to be losing money for 12 years and then suddenly making money. So our IPO is like, we're in that camp of, hey, if it makes sense, we're ready to do it. Right now, it just doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Please, everyone, show your appreciation. Henry Ward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Eric Thedane of Sveriges Riksbank and Thorold Barker of the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you very much. Eric, we're going to do two things in our 14 minutes, 10 minutes, so we've got to get on with it. We're going to talk a little bit about Europe and Europe's competitiveness, and then we're going to talk about financial stability, because you are head of the Basel Committee for Financial Stability.
Banking supervision.
Banking supervision. Yeah. So starting off with Europe, I mean, Europe's had all of these challenges thrown at it over the last few years, tariffs, obviously the Iran war now, and it's been kind of largely written off by America as this kind of slow-growing backwater. Are you seeing signs that Europe is sort of really getting its act together and trying to change this and change the direction and the momentum of growth?
I'm not sure I'm seeing a real change in momentum, but I definitely see signs.
Okay.
So when I go down to meetings in the European context, there is much more of a momentum, a willingness to work together. Uh-huh. I come from a country that typically have been kind of a little bit Eurosceptic, not like in the UK. I know you're from the UK, but a little bit like it's probably a good transaction to be there, but not really into it. And I see even in my country that no, we need to stick to the friends we have. We probably need to do more. And I think one good example is the tariff. The whole tariff issue was actually legally is a decision of the Commission. So that was centralized. I don't think so many people thought about it maybe, but now it came across as very, very good, right? Because when the US administration was going after that, and think of Denmark and Greenland, of course, if Denmark would be alone in that discussion, then the tariff issue would be a weapon. Now it was centralized, so that was... So
slowly but surely
So I think it's better momentum. We're not there yet, but I think people are saying less Europe is a kind of harder time to convince people, and more Europe have, and then it's a lot of differences and how much you should centralize and what have you, but generally speaking.
But you run the Swedish central bank.
True.
You're not in the euro, and Sweden has a reputation for producing tech unicorns. It's been very, very successful as a sort of tech hub, and it's got funding and it's got great export markets. What are the lessons that Europe can learn from Sweden to actually create some of that dynamism in the rest of the...
I think generally speaking, we have an economy including, we have strong trade unions, but we have had trade unions that are adaptive to change. So basically, they have not said we should stick on to old industry. They have said if old industries is going out, then you need to kind of retrain the workforce. So that has created a trade unions that are supportive of change. I think that's been, generally speaking, very important. Then we have been able to create an equity culture through tax incentives way back in time. We have had this strong kind of venture private equity environment. So all in a pension industry, like Denmark and Netherlands and UK, we have a very large pension industry, equity investing pension industry. So everything has worked kind of together. And it's interesting because we get a lot of actually questions even from the larger capitals in Europe, and it was mentioned also in the Draghi report, what could Europe learn from Sweden? That's not, we don't always get that kind of questions, but we actually did that because we have a fairly dynamic capital market and an innovative economy.
And have you got the regulation right in your role in the Basel Committee, which is basically to set rules around banks?
Yeah.
Is the balance right in terms of allowing banks to take risk and to fund things like you're talking about, these tech businesses and other things, versus protecting consumers? Because if you look since the financial crisis, the value of US banks has gone through the roof, and the Europeans have not kept up at all. So there's a huge disconnect now. Is that because we've just been, in Europe, too careful and over-regulating the banks?
No, that's not true. And when you look on the banking side, the problem, I think, to some extent, has been not that they've been over-capitalized, it's been that they've been not profitable. So a lot of the continental European banks have been non-profitable. So they've not been able to kind of gain capital from a profit base. That's not been true for the Nordic banks and some other banking systems. So in the Nordic banking system, same capital requirement as the Southern European banking system, but they have been able to support the economy because they have had this kind of a profit-generating business. So I think, that's totally overstating the argument that, saying that capital is the drag on the contrary, and especially in a crisis. Take the COVID downturn. If you have strong banks, they will be able to support the economy even in a downturn. It's not only about surviving, it's actually about supporting and actually being able to lend in tough times. And I think we were able to do it. Now European banks are in a better position, actually. So of course, you could argue that I will always defend the capital requirement, but I think we have a strong case that banks have been kind of supported in a crisis situation as we had in both inflation, but especially the COVID period.
So what are the big risks to the financial system right now as you see it? Obviously the geopolitical change and the volatility is risky in itself, but I'm not sure we should spend too much time on that. Beyond that, what are the big things that worry you in the banking system in your role on that side of things?
So I'm not so worried about the banking system. We had some good news from the US. They are also now going out with a proposal of Basel III. So we have been able, hopefully, to keep a global kind of banking regulatory system. That's extremely important. That was the lesson learned from 2008. This is not local system. They are all interconnected. What I think we spend a lot of time...
But is there still the international cooperation to make that possible?
I think so in the banking side, until this point. What worries me a little bit is all the new things that you now see evolving. You have the crypto, stable coins, private credit, where we don't have the same global standard, where you definitely need the global standards. There's a lot of work going on, both in the committee, but also on the FSB side, in other settings. But I think we should not kind of forget what we learned in 2008. You need to have global standard because it's all interconnected. And there I think there is anyway some concern, I think.
So stable coins is an example you've just given. As I understand it, there's a very high risk weighting for stable coins, which the Americans don't like so much.
No.
Is that an example of that very different attitude to risk? And is that something that can be bridged, or is there just a very different philosophy when it comes to some of these new things?
I think both. I think when we introduced this prudential regulation on crypto, let's say, I think the narrative then at the time was very much Bitcoin and their cousins, right? Now it's very much the stable coins.
Right.
And they're very, very different. They, to some extent, have the same technology. But stable coins have a different purpose. So what we're now doing in the committee is saying, okay, world has changed. Some jurisdictions are skeptical to the kind of tough regulation that we agreed upon in the committee. Let's have a second look on it. We're not saying that we will change it, but let's say we're going to have a second look. Because, of course, you mentioned US. Stable coins is US.
Right.
That's 95-ish% of the market. So we need, of course, to have a cooperation, a system where we also can bring in, the larger jurisdictions, but still being prudent, because other jurisdictions will be keen to keep this, stable in the US, because it will might spill over to other jurisdictions.
And is Europe keen on stablecoins? I mean, obviously, stablecoins for the US make, in some ways, sense as a way of embedding the dollar as a sort of currency for the future if stablecoins take off. How are the Europeans seeing that? Are they seeing that as a threat? Are they seeing that as an opportunity?
I think, depends on who you ask, but I think some Europeans see the stablecoins as maybe a threat, in the sense that it will, have inroads into the euro system and maybe, take away a little bit of sovereignty. We're not there yet, but I think that's a little bit of the narrative. And hence, that's why the ECB, among others, are pushing for this kind of joint thinking around it. And we have regulation now coming in the US, we have regulation coming in Europe, but they're not really kind of connected, right? So we need to do more about that. I'm not so worried about the sovereignty or the dollarization of a country like Sweden. No, I don't think that will happen. Famous last words, but I don't think so. But for sure, for developing countries, they already had dollarization. This could, of course, increase that. So,
and is that bad, or is that okay?
That's a very good question. That's a philosophical question. It might be better to have it in a digital form rather than in a cash form. But of course, if you ask the countries involved, they probably want to choose their own currency system rather than have it imposed by the market. So
you have your own currency. Do you want to have a digital krona? Is that?
So we have discussed the CDBC. So that's not a stable coin, but a CDBC, which is also, as you know, having a strong momentum now in the euro area with the digital euro. So we have, I wouldn't say plans, but we do have some work going on in that area. We do have a very efficient payment system. We don't use cash. We do mobile pay. We are very, very on the front line here. But of course, things are changing.
So not necessary, but nice.
Not necessary, but I think keep track on what's going on, both on the stablecoin side, but also on the CDBC side in Europe.
So the other question I just wanted to do before we don't have very long is AI and the impact on banking. How disruptive is AI going to be to the model? If you look 10, 15 years out, how much does it change, apart from being a way to take out cost, how fundamentally does it change the banking system and the way it interacts with consumers and other things?
When we talk to banks now, so far hasn't changed that much. Yeah. And I think the reason being that they are also, to some extent, a little bit afraid on, how is this going to be handled by the regulatory supervisory community. So it's changed some internal processes, but not so much on the kind of, let's say, the other parts of the banking system. I think it's going to be, for sure, disruptive in many industries. Exactly how it will play out in the banking side is very, very hard to say. But, you could see many, many fields where this could have inroads, credit ratings, client advice, regulatory issues. So for sure it's going to change.
But as regulators, are you there to, how do you think about the balance between encouraging and facilitating that change and stopping it because it's risky?
No, we will not stop it per se. We will stop it or regulate it if it has risks. And there's many risks you could think of here, both from financial stability, consumer protection. If you, let's say, do all advice through AI, who's responsible for the advice?
Okay.
That's a very fundamental question, right? So I think there the regulator and the supervisor should be to have the consumer protection and financial stability, not being against innovation and AI.
Right, but as you said, they're waiting for you before they do certain things. So there's sort of a standoff, yeah?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure me and the Basel Committee, but I think, yeah, there's a little bit of a standoff because I think especially the larger banks, they have a reputation to protect, right? So I think they're a little bit cautious, although it's a fast-moving market, right? That they don't do anything wrong here. So I think they do have a lot of interaction also with their supervisors.
Okay, so just last thing, there was a lot of talk over the last week or so about Mythos, the latest Anthropic release, and the challenges that might bring for cybersecurity and challenges there. Have you been briefed on this as a central banker? What's your sense of that risk and that immediate challenge?
So what I basically done is to talk to my fellow regulators in my country and say we probably need to, as they do in the US and other countries, have a discussion with our banks, how to prepare for this, and again use the international network to get more information. So that's basically where I've been so far.
And how well prepared are the banks?
I think generally speaking, banks are fairly well prepared when it comes to cyber risk because they are attacked by cyber attacks every day, 24/7. And that's been the case, and increasingly so in a country like Sweden because we have Russian attacks, we have Russia-sponsored attacks, I should say, and also from other countries. So I think generally speaking, and as central banks, we need to be on high alert when it comes to cybersecurity, but on this specific mythos, whatever the expression is in English, no, I could say we're prepared for that, but I think maybe we could say that we have a fairly good starting point.
Okay. We're out of time,
yeah.
But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Please welcome Simpiwait Shabalala of Standard Bank Group and Alexis Akwagiram of Semafor.
Well, good afternoon, Sim. As I'm sure many people here know, Sim Shabalala is the CEO of Standard Bank, which is Africa's biggest bank by assets. And Sim, I wanted to start by talking about obviously the biggest story in the world at the moment, which is the war in Iran. And I wanted to know, how has the war changed Standard Bank's outlook on economic growth in Africa? And I'm thinking in terms of the medium-term outlook as well as the long-term outlook.
Alexi, the World Bank and the IMF just today have revised the global outlook, and in particular for Africa, in each case from 4.5 in the case of the World Bank to 4.1, and the IMF has revised it down to 4.3 for 2026. For South Africa, we have kept our own outlook for GDP growth at 1.5%, and we have not changed the projections. Like everybody, we do all the scenarios. We plan for the worst, and we hope for the best. And we position our organization based on the actual facts as they unfold. Whilst we are saddened by the conflagration in the Middle East and the war, I mean, one death is a death too many. We're very saddened by it, but we still do believe that it's too early to be definitive about which scenario is going to play out. And so we've not changed our plans. We're still working on the assumption that South Africa will grow at 1.5%, the continent at roughly 4.1, 4.2, 4.3%, and therefore our profits and our targets will not have changed. But what is true, however, is the human cost, so higher oil prices, higher inflation, a tough time for consumers and a tough time for businesses. And then, of course, what we don't speak often about, as much as we ought to, is the potential food security issues arising from the price of fertilizers. something that concerns us deeply.
And do you see any sectors, any particular sectors as being particularly vulnerable? Are you seeing any signs of financial strain from clients in particular sectors?
Not yet, but what you can expect, as I say, is high inflation. Consumers, households are going to have a much more difficult time with high inflation and high interest rates for longer than we had hoped for. If you just think about the various countries and then think about the sectors as well, oil exporters are likely to do significantly better. In the case of Angola, for example, their budget was at $61 per barrel, so there's a windfall at these prices. Nigeria, good for the fiscal position of the country, but to the extent that they import refined oil, it's going to be inflationary on Nigeria. In the case of Ghana, it's a mixed bag. Gold receipts and oil is going to be good for the country, but not so good in the case of the cocoa industry. And then Kenya, on the other end, is an oil importer. Very, very tough for the fiscal position of the country, and very, very tough for inflation and for consumers.
And what about the fiscal position of South Africa? Because South Africa is a fascinating case. Obviously, it's the continent's biggest economy.
Yes.
As well as that, the end of last year just looked like the country was turning a corner. I mean, South Africa came off the grey list. Then as well as that, there was a situation with the ratings upgrade, which was the first time in about 30 years. And the stock market was on the tear. And then this happens. And South Africa does rely on fuel imports to a large extent. So, I mean, how do you see things playing out in terms of the macro situation with South Africa?
So the premise of your question is challengeable to the extent that the terms of trade actually have been pretty good for South Africa, in particular because of gold, of oil, of the platinum group metals and so forth. So interestingly, we are still thinking, as I said, that GDP growth in South Africa will be at around 1.5%. And as I say, a large part of it has to do with the positive terms of trade. South Africa has definitely turned the corner. The largest economy on the African continent, growing at faster than 1.5%, will be a good thing. We think by 2028 it will be growing at about 2%. We think it can grow faster in that time period if the structural reforms that are being implemented in the country are accelerated. So successfully having implemented structural reforms in the power sector, turning to logistics. The logistics situation in the country is improving. There's less congestion at the ports, freight is improving, and so forth. And the attention is now turning to the municipalities and to the water sector. And all of that is showing up in private sector credit extension. For corporates, that's the fastest growing part, for example, of our business, of our book, lending to businesses in the power sector, logistics, the telcos, diversified industrials, and so forth. And then the consumer in much better shape this year than they have been in a long time. And that's showing up in lower delinquencies in the period from 1 day to 90 days, lower non-performing loans, and therefore lower cost of credit for us. And the book there as well is starting to grow for home loans, vehicle and asset finance, and unsecured lending. So the consumer is in better shape as well.
And what more does the coalition government need to do to make sure that these reforms go through?
It needs to, so firstly, just a quick word on the coalition. South Africa is in a very interesting place in that the center is holding. Yeah. And so the coalition between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and then the IFP and the Freedom Front Plus, is really the center. It's parties, some are to the right of center and some are to the left of center. And their policies are as orthodox as they come. Fiscal policy, monetary policy, and indeed in the case of labor policy and industrial policy. And that is resulting in an accelerated execution of the structural reforms that I'm referring to. And in fact, the biggest one I think that is now confronting everybody is dealing with the rule of law. The faster we can accelerate the implementation of structural reforms in the space of rule of law, the faster GDP will grow. I mean, you know that if you go back for decades, There's a direct correlation between the rule of law and GDP growth.
And just on that point, just to be clear then, is your argument that essentially it's the success of the coalition government that is really driving some of these gains?
To be fair to the ANC, much of the structural reforms in Operation Vulindlela, which is a project that is being executed, were activities that had commenced prior to the coalition. What the coalition has done is it has speeded them up. It has accelerated the pace at which they are being implemented. And as I say to you, the faster they are executed, the faster the country will grow. And I'm in the space, I'm in the grouping of people that believe that we can grow at between 3 and 4% in the medium term in the country by accelerating the execution of those structural.
And when you say the medium term, how many years are we putting on this?
3 to 5 years.
Okay. And then I wanted to turn our attention to the banking sector and you as a bank and how you're dealing with innovation, technological innovation specifically. How are you adapting to the challenge of fintech players? We're talking about people like Optasia. I know you have a formal partnership, but there's Optasia, Flutterwave, Paystack, several fintechs around the continent of Africa that are really upstarts and offering a different type of solution to financial services. So what are you doing?
What is true about South Africa and what is true about the African continent is that the banking system is quite advanced. Not many people would know this, but in the case of South Africa, for example, we have consistently been at the cutting edge of the implementation of the Basel rules, by way of example. The capital adequacy in our bank, for example, or in the industry generally, is at about 14% for common equity tier 1, which is the shareholders' equity and retained earnings, the best form of equity. It's 1.5 times larger than it was prior to the global financial crisis. So the system in South Africa is well run and well regulated, and the same proposition applies to a number of countries on the African continent. What is also true is that we have got large legacy systems and large legacy banks in South Africa and on the continent, which slows down innovation, the extent to which you've got large installed capacity. But what is also true is that in many instances we are capable of leapfrogging on the African continent, which then speaks to what you're getting at, the role that has been played by fintechs. Fintechs are providing solutions for clients that banks are either unable to provide or unwilling to provide.
Such as?
Spectrum. Cheap payments, the last mile, nano loans, you're referring to Optasia. Nano loans where somebody needs to go and buy stuff from the market in the morning, borrows in the morning, sells their goods during the day in the market, and pays back the loan in the afternoon. That's a need that is there and is being provided by the likes of Optasia. I have to say, however, that the gentle art of banking has been in existence for a very long time, and it is not going to change in its nature. Maturity transformation, taking deposits and lending to people in the long term, requires vast capabilities in risk management and in compliance. This is what we do best. So whilst the fintechs are very, very good at providing those payment solutions, those sophisticated payment solutions, at the price that clients are willing to pay for, the fundamentals of banking are still provided by the large banks and the financial institutions. And I have to say that fortune favors the big battalions in banks. You need a big balance sheet to be able to take some of the risks that banks need to take. And so the likes of Flutterwave, the likes of Optasia, are people that you would want to partner with. And what we bring to the party are things that they can't do, and you hope then you're able to get the benefit of the last mile, for example, that they would be providing you with.
But you mentioned big battalions, and in banking terms in Africa, there's no one bigger than you. As I said at the top, you are the biggest bank by assets in the continent.
Yeah.
But not all banks, not all brick and mortar banks, legacy institutions have the scale that you have. They don't operate on the same scale as you. So do you envisage a situation in which, because of that innovation and because fintechs are offering services that some other banks don't, there'll be more consolidation in the banking sector across Africa, not just South Africa?
I do think that because of firstly, the riskiness of banks and the need for capital, smaller, fewer banks are a better solution than a larger number of banks, just as a general proposition. And so in countries where you've got a proliferation of banks, there does come a time when there's consolidation because of the lack of discipline in large parts of the financial sector when there are far too many banks. And so there is bound to be consolidation as a result of that. We're starting to experience that in South Africa. We saw it in Nigeria. The authorities lifted the capital requirements because there were far too many banks and there were far too many people at the periphery of the industry that were doing unacceptable things in the market. I do envisage a situation where there will be that consolidation. There will be partnerships between incumbents and fintechs, and some of the fintechs will consolidate. The banking system will change, but the large parts of it will remain the same. And I go back to it again. Taking deposits, you want to be certain that your deposit will be repaid when you demand it. And you want to be certain that the person who is taking your deposits is adequately capitalized and they've got the liquidity to pay you back when you want your money.
But just to pin you down quickly, over what period of time do you think that consolidation might happen across the continent with banks and fintechs?
Alexis, it's going to differ. In Nigeria, it's just happened. Yeah. It depends on the circumstances in the various countries. In South Africa, it's likely to happen again because you've got 6 large banks and you've got a number of small A2 banks, and they're already showing signs of advanced challenges, if I could put it that way. There is just going to be consolidation, no question about it.
And we're not doing well for time, but I think I could squeeze in maybe one more. Just very quickly, South Africa published a draft policy on AI late last week. I just wondered, from your perspective, how do you think AI could change the way in which banking operates in Africa?
I would offer to you that it's going to change it fundamentally in ways that you and I cannot imagine. I think we have to approach this with a dose of humility. We don't really know what it will result in, but we do know that it's the iPhone moment or the personal computer moment or the Jevons paradox moment where you know that the industry is going to change fundamentally and you need to prepare your organization for that. And in our case, we're investing a vast amount of money on productivity and on improving customer experience using agentic AI because we think that that is just the right thing to do for our clients. We're concerned about what it will mean for our staff, but I'm in the space of being hopeful rather than being dystopian about it because I think that jobs will change, some jobs will be displaced, but people will find new jobs. Like, for example, when the ATM was introduced in the 1970s, actually tellers, the number of tellers hired actually increased as a consequence thereof, and I believe the same thing will happen here.
Sim, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Please welcome Bettina Orlop of Commerzbank and Andrew Edgecliffe-Johnson of Semafor.
Thank you and welcome, Bettina Orlop. So we're delighted to have you here. We have the whole future of capitalism to discuss, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about the past and the history of capitalism. Commerzbank started 155 years ago?
56.
156
to be
years
super
ago.
correct, yeah.
Your roots are in the port of Hamburg,
yeah.
where you were helping German exporters, finance their trade. Yeah. So let's start with trade. One year on from Liberation Day, how are those German exporters doing?
They are still doing well because one of the secrets is fast adaptation. So what they basically have done, and this is a development which probably has started already since the pandemic, is that this localization of business, also because of supply chain problems and stuff like that, have started very early, that there was the belief that it's probably better to have different locations, and then apparently with the tariffs going on, localization is the one recipe, at least for larger corporates, to solve some of the problems which are emerging with the tariffs. Yeah.
We now have the new strain of conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Germany is in the middle of it's a very energy-intensive, a lot of energy demands and energy dependence in the German economy. What is the particular impact of that conflict that you've seen so far from your customers?
Well, there's not a real immediate effect, you could say, because I mean there's some exposure to the Middle East, but it's limited. You clearly see the first impacts, but that is more actually on the private side in the moment, because many of the corporates have basically secured energy for quite a while, so they are hedged to a certain point. And so you see it on the private side, and there's a public debate also about it. But I mean, what we all fear, I think, is a second and third round effects which might happen out of the crisis, or if the crisis continues to be there. So short term, they have proven again to be very resilient. But you see it basically when it comes to GDP growth assumptions for Europe and Germany, and I think that is something which is very similar to the rest of the world, that this has decreased at least for 2026 now. And it was not before, it was not a high number, it was 0.9%, but now our own economic department, but also I think consensus, has decreased to 0.6%, which is not anymore a lot to have, and so that is something. But the good thing for us is that corporates, as said, are pretty resilient, and we as banks clearly also benefit a little bit from the volatility, I have to say.
And is there anything in those second and third order effects you mentioned that causes you real concern, that you're watching closely as a risk?
I think it's all about, I mean, the things what we currently see, the turbulences, is clearly something which asks to have a even more resilient risk management. Right. So we really have to think a lot about diversification. We help our corporate clients to think about hedging, to really make sure that they have the right instruments in place, also when it comes to FX effects and other things. So it's more about being prepared, or prepare yourself for some of the turbulence that might come.
Is anything changing your decisions right now on capital allocation in the context of this conflict and its effects?
Well, I mean, as a bank, you anyhow should do a sound diversification, and specifically if you're a big lender as we are. You always need to make sure that you have a very nice balanced exposure to different regions, but also to different industries. And it's also very clear when you have certain industries specifically under pressure that you will be a little bit more reluctant to expand your exposure there, in contrary to things which are growing, and the same holds true for regions.
Right. So historically, your core customer base has been the Mittelstand, the backbone of the German economy, the smaller and medium-sized businesses. And you mentioned how the biggest companies have hedges. They've arranged their energy prices far into the future. But what's the confidence level like in that Mittelstand group of companies?
Well, first of all, I mean, the larger medium-sized corporates, the so-called Mittelstand, they have exactly the same instruments in place. They are also following a very diversified strategy. What we have seen, specifically because of all the things going on in the last 3-4 years in Germany, that there has been a reluctance, unfortunately, to invest in Germany, but also medium-sized corporates have gone abroad and have invested somewhere else. So they also pursue this localization strategy. It's not only the large corps, it's also the medium-sized corporates who are doing it. And we as a bank, we support them in that. One should not forget that approximately 30% of German export runs over the books of Commerzbank, so we have a good view on it. So it's more a little bit the reluctance of really doing investments in Germany. There's a willingness to do so. We have the Made for Germany initiative, which clearly shows and underpins that there's a willingness to invest, but it's also connected to some expectations what the government needs to do to decrease the bureaucracy topics, to flexibilize the labor market and some other things.
One of the other features of the German economy recently has been a sort of shift in government thinking about investment in security and defense. I believe you're the house bank for Rheinmetall, is that right?
Well, we are not talking about certain client names, but I can tell you that given that most of the defense companies have been medium-sized corporates for quite a while and have not been really in the spotlight of some of the larger banks, you can fairly assume that we had always a very fair share in supporting defense companies in it, because we also always followed the route that we would support defense companies as long as it fits to the stance of German government, and that's why we have not have not seen the defense companies for the first time a year ago, but we really support them since decades.
How much of an opportunity do you think that is for Commerzbank?
I mean, it's clearly a growing market. There's a lot of investment going into it. We also see that there have been some very successful IPOs and things like that in recent times, and there are more to come. So it is a growing business. It's also an opportunity for some medium-sized corporates, which are more in the moment in the auto supplier, car supplier industry, which are now directing more their activities in the defense, which makes sense. But that alone will not help. I mean, it's a very good industry, but we also need some other industries to develop better.
So jumping across the Atlantic, you've played a major role in assisting German companies with their FDI into the US, but what's the particular opportunity in the US market for you as a bank right now?
Well, I mean, Commerzbank has a rule that we always do business and corporate clients with German, Swiss, and Austrian connectivity, and Poland, because we have a subsidiary there. And what we do is we support German clients to the world. So wherever they have activities, where they invest, where they open up factories, or where they do trade with, we are supporting them. And the US is apparently a very important market for Europe and specifically also for Germany. So for us, Commerzbank, the US is clearly one of the most important markets outside of Germany, because we see still a lot of activity. We see a lot of, as I said, localization of businesses. And we also see, however, also a number of US companies interested in Europe and Germany, and we also do the other way around.
Right. So on this stage earlier today, we had Andrea Orsell from UniCredit speaking. His bank amassed a stake of 29% in Commerzbank, I believe, since September 2024, and put a 35 billion euro takeover offer on the table in March, which you've not picked up. He said today that he believes, he's a patient man, but he believes the time is now for a decision on that deal. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, we will see. At the very end, it's the shareholders who will decide on it. I mean, we had now for 18 months a situation that UniCredit is a large shareholder of Commerzbank. We also had, and that is important to note, we always had a very constructive, at least from our perspective, constructive dialogue with them. So we met very regularly to answer their questions, to receive their feedback. So we were a little bit surprised by the fact that they were that they believed that we are not listening to them and that we are not open for a dialogue, because we are. And we always said that we would also talk about a business combination agreement whenever there is something like a draft proposal on the table. So we also had some talks over the past weeks, and I think it became pretty clear that we do not have, I would say, a shared vision on a future business model. The other part and more important part is that we clearly are in disagreement about the valuations and the exchange ratio. And my task is to defend the interest of our stakeholders of Commerzbank, and that starts specifically with the shareholders. And we believe that we have a very good standalone strategy, and if someone wants to take us over, you also need to offer a decent price. And that is something we defend. And what we do is currently implementing our standalone strategy, further developing it. We will also announce some updated targets beginning of May in order to allow our shareholders to do a proper comparison of the different things. And at the very end, it's a decision of the shareholder.
Is it purely a shareholder decision? The future of capitalism here, is it stakeholder capitalism or shareholder capitalism? I ask because the German government seems to have signaled it's not in love with this idea.
Well, first of all, the German government is also a shareholder, so they have, I think, every right to speak up because they are a shareholder.
That rather muddles the definition of shareholder.
Well, they are a shareholder, as UniCredit is a shareholder, and I think what we have done over the last 18 months as a management team, together with the complete Commerzbank team, we really increased value for all our stakeholders. I mean, our market cap has nicely developed. We will return a lot of money to shareholders for the year 2025, and we intend to continue that story for the next years. And you know, I mean, and that's true for all corporations, and specifically for a bank, you can only have a decent business model in place if you keep all stakeholder interest in balance. Because, I mean, without happy clients who you serve with the right business model, you will not have any revenues, which doesn't make you happy as a shareholder. And we are in a service business, meaning we really need to have motivated staff who really wants to give their best to the clients. And therefore, you really need to find the right balance between shareholders, customers, and staff. And I think we have found this balance pretty nicely with the momentum strategy over the past quarters. And this is the whole question. And at the very end, you need to find the right balance.
So what do you think of the big picture principle that Europe needs more pan-European banks?
I think that we need that, but the point is, as we are missing out, as everybody knows, a little bit on the banking union side. So you can't, in the moment, really shift liquidity and capital from one country to another, because there are some missing elements in the equation. You basically also miss out on cross-border synergies for the moment. That might change, so I think we should all stay open for that. But at the very end, when you also think about UniCredit Commerzbank, what you're evaluating is what can be achieved through the domestic consolidation, which you would have by combining HVB and Commerzbank. And there you just have to ask yourself, is it enough? Do you want to have that? Or is it better to have the standalone strategies pursued?
We're running short of time, but what do you do if he decides to sell, if UniCredit sells that large position? Have you got a plan for mitigating what that might do to your share price?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's a question how UniCredit would do that. They would definitely, because, I mean, they made tons of money, so they want to do that in a way to protect their value. And they had a very smart way in coming into Commerzbank. I'm pretty sure they would find also a very smart way of going out. So I'm not necessarily concerned about that.
We didn't get to talk about private credit, but what is the German for cockroaches?
Pardon?
What is the German for cockroaches?
Kakerlake. Yeah, I mean, that is a favorite phrase of the CFO of Commerzbank and myself, is that we are in the lucky position that our exposure only contains fraction of nuts when it comes to private credit US.
Right. Thank you, Bettina.
Thank you very much.
Great having you here. Thanks.
Please welcome Georges El Hadri of HSBC and Clay Chandler of Semafor.
HSBC, one of the world's most extraordinary businesses, and I'm here with HSBC Group CEO, Georges El Hadri, and we're sitting at HSBC's iconic headquarters here in Hong Kong, looking out over the spectacular Hong Kong harbor. Let's talk a little bit about your tenure as Group CEO here. You were appointed in 2024. When your appointment was announced, the reaction from investors, shareholders, market analysts, quite favorable. What's interesting to me is that you moved really quickly to make some very big changes. And, I might say transformational, even a little bit radical, very soon after your appointment. Talk to us a little bit about that plan and why you felt it was so urgent.
I was appointed I took office September 2024. Mm-hmm. But I had spent at that time 19 years in the bank.
Yeah.
I've built an amazing network within HSBC of people from different geographies, different businesses, different functions. And I've been building and taking feedback throughout these years. The consensual feedback by everyone I've been interacting with, all the way from the seniors to the juniors, is that HSBC has massive potential, but some of it has to be unlocked. Customers love working with us and want to do more with us, but there is this sense that we sometimes hold ourselves back or come in our own way because of some of historic complexity or historic bureaucracy that just built a little by little over time, and that needed addressing so that we can unleash this potential. It also meant that there were a lot of ideas across the network. I've built a lot of ideas that have come to me. It allowed me to form with my leadership team a good view of what needed to be done for this bank, and it allowed me also to get the conversations with the board to be able to start it as soon as possible, so we don't waste time. If you want, no better time to fix the roof than when the sun is shining. So we started on that journey. At the February results 2 months back, we announced that we are going to, for a big part of it, we are going to be able to deliver it 6 months ahead of plan. It's moving at pace, it's moving on plan and on track, and it's moving well.
You've really stressed speed, as you've mentioned here, accountability, and the ability to focus as the hallmarks of what you wanted to achieve. Say a little bit about that, if you could, and why you thought those were urgent.
What we do needs to matter. Very simple. Mm-hmm. It needs to matter for our clients. Mm-hmm. It needs to matter for our colleagues, and it needs to matter for our shareholders and other stakeholders. But it only matters if we're the best at doing it. So what we needed to hone in on and focus on is those areas where we are the best at doing, where customers expect us and want to work with us because we're the best at delivering it. Competitive advantage, competitive edge is very important, but of course it needs to be areas where we generate the right returns for shareholders, mm-hmm. and it needs to be areas with the right growth opportunities. Okay? So focusing on those areas and accepting that what does not meet these criteria, we should stop doing, is very important. And this has taken us on a journey of what we call participation choices, where we're shedding some of the less strategic, low returning mm-hmm. activities to focus on these areas of strength where we can generate good returns and grow. The next one is how we do things. And it's very important to realize the world is moving fast. Our customers' needs and our customers' goals are evolving fast, and we need to move at that pace.
Many big global banks like HSBC have worked long and hard to build up their operations in China to get full control, licensing of those operations. But in the last couple of years, many of your Wall Street peers have actually stepped back a little bit, found that it's been difficult for them to get the kind of returns that they expected from the Chinese mainland. But HSBC has really gone full steam ahead and continues to expand and grow and put a lot of emphasis on that market. Can you explain that sort of dichotomy a little bit?
China is a very important pillar in our overall strategy. First, we've been born jointly in Hong Kong and Shanghai 161 years ago. So the deep cultural understanding and the deep connectivities we built with China as a whole and the rest of the world is an experience and muscle memory that we have for 161 years. But what we've been observing for the last decade is that there is a material growth in another trend, which is that of Chinese companies going international. And the China outbound, where corporates invest internationally, build manufacturing capabilities internationally, and that could be anywhere from ASEAN, India, the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. Transfer technology, employ, and generate growth in all these markets is amazing, and that trend is actually growing very strong.
Prior to your appointment, there was a great debate among some of the bank's leading shareholders that you should actually spin off the China or the Asia operations separate from your European operations because there were greater profits there, and people argued that it didn't make sense that the bank was regulated in London and actually had its most successful business operations in a completely different part of the world. Bank management prevailed in arguing that that was not the right way to go for HSBC, and that HSBC's kind of value add was being a truly global institution. Has that thesis been vindicated since your appointment? Do you think, are you comfortable with maintaining that kind of global perspective?
Absolutely. From day one of HSBC, on the 3rd of March 1865, HSBC was founded by its customers for their international trading needs. So we have been a connector between Asia and Europe, Asia and the Americas, Asia and the Middle East. We have been a connector across the world between East and West, North and South for 161 years. That's exactly our DNA, and that's what we're best at doing. And that is what's generating a lot of our value add to our shareholders, but our value add to our customers. If you look at China specifically, in mainland China, 6 of our 10 largest customers in revenue are US customers. They're not Chinese customers. In China, they don't need us. But if you look in many other markets in the world, what are the top league table customers in revenue? They'll be Chinese customers. And I can go on and on about British customers and German and French and Southeast Asian and Singaporean, etc. But that concept of we are the main bank for a corporate that leaves their shores for international ambitions, we become automatically their main banker, is really what's differentiated us. And that's very valuable. Now, also, remember, we're also a home market bank in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong generates 1/3 of our profit, being the bank in Hong Kong across HSBC, and now a fully privatized Hang Seng Bank. So Hong Kong, as a deeply rooted, culturally very aligned bank, both in terms of the international bank that HSBC offers Hong Kong personal banking customers, or the community bank that Hang Seng Bank offers Hong Kong personal banking customers, is also a fantastic operation, but it's part of what HSBC is.
One of the things that you've been criticized a little bit for is for missing out on the IPO boom that we've had in Hong Kong over the past year. Hong Kong did almost $40 billion worth of new listings last year, was the leading market in the world, and HSBC got a relatively small share of those deals. I think of the 100 companies that came to market, HSBC was the lead underwriter for 1 or 2 of them. Are you satisfied with that, and what are your plans to kind of capitalize on that going forward?
First, we're very pleased to see Hong Kong kind of recover in IPO and be the IPO center of the planet. That is a demonstration of the vibrancy of this economy, and doubling down on our Hong Kong investments, is aligned to the overall perception of where Hong Kong is, globally. Most of the IPOs that took place in 25 were IPOs that have been awarded, mandated in 23 or 24. And yes, we probably haven't been focused enough and maybe dispersed. What we've taken, one of the decisions I've taken as part of the strategic, is to shed our equity capital market activities and M&A activities in the UK and the US, recognizing that we haven't been a top-tier player in the space, and double down our focus on Asia and the Middle East. I would say let's be a bit patient, but recognize that we absolutely want to be a leading player in this space, as well as anything else we do in Hong Kong.
We talked a little bit about your strategy and the objectives behind it. Just in the short space of your tenure, it has really seemed to pay off. You mentioned announcing the financial results in February. I mean, your stock price late February was at a record high. It's been, I think, doubled since you have been appointed as CEO. So markets seem to be, applauding the direction that you were taking the bank. And yet, a few days after that announcement, Washington announced that it was dropping bombs on Iran. Your stock is down about 15% since then. How are you looking at the global conflict right now, particularly in the Gulf? Are you seeing this as a long-term thing that really is going to shape and affect your strategy, or are you seeing this as just a risk you have to kind of take in stride and doesn't change your strategic choices at all?
What's happening in the Middle East is tragic. We never wish it to everyone. The concern we have with wars in general, and I'm talking with some experience having lived in one for 16 years, is that those who pay the highest price are those who have nothing to do with it, unfortunately. So there will be impacts from this war, and the longer it lasts, the longer it will take for those impacts to resolve and normalize. And the impacts will be felt way beyond the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East impact is, of course, very difficult, for sectors like tourism or travel, and we need to be cognizant of that. And by the way, we are supporting our customers to get through this short-term difficulty. But the impact will be felt beyond. Oil prices, oil shortage, LNG, LPG shortage, cooking gas, fertilizer shortage will be felt for any importing economy. It'll be felt across Asia, it'll be felt in Europe, it'll be felt in Latin America, it will be felt. Fertilizers, you'll feel it, and we will know about it once we go into a crop season and we realize crops haven't been probably as rich and as expected if there were some shortage of fertilizers or if the cost is high. All of that will be here to haunt us, and we just need to be collectively, all economies around the planet, we need to be very ready for that, how we support our customers navigate it. Now, things will normalize, but I'm afraid that we're going to go through a rough patch across the world in the meanwhile.
Georges, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's wonderful to be here with you, and we hope you can join us at the Semafor World Economy annual convening in Washington next year. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Clay.
Please welcome LeJune Montgomery Tabron of W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Priscilla Sims Brown of Amalgamated Bank, and Alexis Aqua Giram of Semafor.
So, Priscilla
Yes.
and LeJune, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. What has really struck me in talking to you just before backstage, what's really struck me is how you both oversee organizations at a moment of real, genuine political change. And I wanted to just start this conversation by working out how you are navigating that change. I'll start with you, Priscilla. I mean, you are the CEO of Amalgamated Bank, and that's a socially responsible bank. Now, around 40% of Amalgamated's lending is climate related. So I wanted to start by just asking you, is the ESG label now a liability, or are you seeing investor demand hold up?
Absolutely, it's holding up. Yeah. As you said, we're a bank first, and we are America's socially responsible bank. And we think that means that we have an obligation to, as my mother would say, think of the least of these. And with respect to climate, there are market forces that are compelling for this. So not only do we get to do good, we also do well when these market forces are present. So when you think about utility scale clean energy, that's not a really polarized point, because the largest states that are involved in major projects around this are red states. They're Republican states. Texas being the leader among them. So clearly that's not a political issue, really, because the market forces are suggesting that, there's real value there. It's also true that the supply of energy of all kinds is greater than the demand. I'm sorry, the other way around. Demand is greater than supply. Yep. And with that being the case, you also have clean energy being cheaper than brown energy. So all of these combine to make it not only a good thing to do, it's also a smart business thing. So you're right, 40%, and it's propelled us to becoming a very well-respected company with great performance in our stock over the period of the last 5 years when this has become such a prominent part of our business.
And you're saying it's not a liability then, obviously?
Not at all.
But then equally, in terms of that demand, that point that you made, I mean, where do you see that going? Do you see that demand just increasing and there being an even stronger case then?
Well, I think every third party that's been involved in the research around this would tell you that with all of the things going on in the global world today, both from a political perspective, wars, you are seeing a shorter supply of energy, not a larger, longer supply. And this is energy that's reliable, it's available, and it's something we understand. And so financing that makes great sense for us.
And then at this point, I mean, Lejeune, I wanted to bring you in. Again, clearly the situation has changed for you in as much as Kellogg Foundation, racial equity has been at the center of the Kellogg Foundation's mandate. It's really crucial, it's fundamental to what you do. So with that in mind, I wondered, with regards to the current administration's opposition to what it calls DEI initiatives and programs, and I know we spoke about this, you don't like that term, where does that leave you in terms of, have you sought legal counsel for starters? Are you confident that legally what you do holds up? And then also, have you made any other changes?
Yeah, so first of all, our foundation's North Star is children, and Mr. Kellogg wanted all children to thrive, all children all around the world. And we've been doing this work for almost 100 years. So for us, all children means all children. It's very expansive. And our racial equity frame is just making sure that we're capturing all children wherever we geographically do our work. So we're very committed to that mission. We are very focused on making sure that wherever we work, there's no child left out of the conversation, that the perspectives of all children and families are included as decisions are being made. And we do our work globally. And so I don't think we're not uncomfortable in this time with that mission. We've never called our work diversity, equity, inclusion. We've called it a racial equity frame that is very expansive. And that's why we work in states across the United States, Mississippi, a red state, Louisiana, New Mexico, Michigan. We've always been extremely expansive, and we continue to do so because we do want policies and systems to benefit all children, and we take that literally.
And just on the specific point that I raised about the legal issues,
yes.
Have you checked that out?
Oh yeah, I think everyone in this space has sought legal counsel. We don't want to do anything that is illegal. What we've learned is our framing is not illegal. We are very much in alignment with those expectations, and we want to continue to comply. So we're doing that very well. But I think it doesn't impact our work because, again, all children means just that. And our frame is to make sure we're capturing everyone.
And just one last point on this. Have you had to make any changes? So, for example, have you had to alter programs in some way, or at least advise grantees to change their approach in some way?
Not change their approach, but maybe be more descriptive about what we are actually doing. So I think our frame has been one that is doubling down on making sure that our language is clear and that we actually describe more about what we do, because the shorthand may be shortcut into thinking that it is anything about quotas or anything that has to do with any kind of screening. It actually is the opposite, and what we've learned how to do is to frame the work around the people we serve in communities. And when we go into communities, we're looking to make sure that we're representing all people of those communities. And that has been our safe space. And when we looked at the language in the Supreme Court ruling, it was very clear that geographic focus and making sure that we are inclusive within those geographies is exactly a frame that is not illegal, that works for everything we've been doing for almost 100 years.
Just talking to you both, I'm really struck by the way in which communities, you both, there's a lot strong overlap between you both when you talk about communities. Yeah. You both referenced that. Priscilla, what I wanted to ask you was, when we were talking before, you mentioned the wealth gap. You spoke of the challenge therein. So could you talk a bit more about what you mean by the wealth gap and the challenges that raises? And then also specifically, what I want to know is, what role can mission-driven financial institutions like yours play in enabling the flow of capital into these communities that you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is another area that is not, when you really get to the core of what every American cares about and what every politician or one who governs is responsible for, it is to make sure that we are giving people the opportunities that they should have, that are not, that there are no barriers based on artificial descriptions of an individual, right? So you should go as far as your talent and grit will take you in this country. That is a basic theme that I think every politician, every individual subscribes to as an American. So if you think about that in a broader sense, you also think about the protection and safety of communities. Communities are most safe when people in those communities feel that they've got a shot. And if you look at global unrest, if you look at unrest in America, if you look at unrest in neighborhoods, whether it's petty crime, whether it's larger scale problems, it generally, at the root of it is often the lack of opportunity. The sense that people have that I have no other shot, I have no other chance except to rebel against the system in a violent way. And what is that really saying? That is saying that we have not protected our citizens equally. So the wealth gap is the best sort of metric for looking at that. If you are widening the wealth gap, if your median wealth is lower than your average and continues to widen that way, then you've got a problem. You're creating a problem. You're not being responsible to your community. And that's true for banks, it's true for government, it's true for everyone who has the ability to affect that gap. So for banks, it means, and financial institutions more broadly, it means access to capital. If you aren't giving access to capital to people evenly, then you are widening the gap. You're creating the problem. You can't be on both sides of the problem. You're either solving it by providing access to capital, or you're not, you're creating it by limiting access to capital. And we think it's really important to be clear about and decisive and intentional about which side of that problem you want to be on.
And why mission-driven specifically? Because
that's what mission-driven is.
Yeah.
And we believe you can do well and do good, and we've proved it. We've certainly proved it since 2018 when we became a publicly traded company. We've proven it by both the growth in our share price on the shareholder side, but the impact that we have, both directly in the lending that we do, and importantly, in the support and partnerships that we develop, both with customers and with other financial institutions, particularly CDFIs and smaller community banks. We believe that's the lifeblood of many of our communities, particularly communities that are underserved, and we think it's really important to hold those groups up.
And this tells us a lot about your approach to what happens in this country. I'd just like to broaden out the scope of this conversation slightly to the international perspective, because again, as I say, there've been a raft of changes that have occurred since this administration has come to office. On the international front, look at what's happened with USAID. I mean, that dispersed something in the region of $40 billion a year to 130 countries. That's gone. So no one expects philanthropy to fill that gap, but I do wonder, how does that alter the work that you do at the Kellogg Foundation overseas, and what changes are you making?
Yeah, and you said it, we will never fill the gap of USAID. We're one foundation. Our portfolio is about $10 billion, so we give away close to $500 million each year. And we have a very broad global portfolio of grants. But I'll give you an example. We fund in Haiti, and Haiti has been one of our programmatic areas since the earthquakes. And we entered Haiti, and even prior to that, we had given grants. But because of the earthquake, we wanted to not only support the recovery, but we knew that it had to be a long-term commitment. So we've committed ourselves, not only to Haiti, but all of our places. When we go in, we commit ourselves for a generation. And what we know then is in working in places like Haiti, when that USAID resource left, they were the largest funder of Haiti. So hospitals closed almost immediately. People were, literally were dying in hospitals. So what we were able to do as one foundation was to leverage the resources that we did have. And that's the whole, I think, ecosystem of economic development has to include philanthropy, business, government, every citizens, the citizenry. And when any of that falters, the others do step up, and a collaboration and a partnership occurs. So in our case, we went out and made a challenge, and we said we'll give $30 million if we can leverage 2 for 1 of that $30 million to put back into Haiti during these most difficult times. And we were able to achieve that. We raised $90 million that we sent to the hospitals, that we sent to the places in Haiti that were struggling. And the one other thing I will say is, when people think about whether those resources were for good or whether they were fueling corruption, one of the things about how we do our work is we don't work in any place where we don't have nationals on the ground. Every place we work, we don't send people to go to work in Haiti. They live there. They're part of, they're Haitian nationals. So we are very clear that those resources went directly to the most trusted organizations on the ground that people know and respect, that have the influence to make sure that those resources were used for the purposes. And that's how we do in all of our places.
And I can see that you found a way to make that work with Haiti. However, this is now the status quo going forward. I mean, and it doesn't look like that money is going to come back. So then how are you going to adapt? So for example, you have a presence in Haiti and Mexico, and there's Southern Africa. So what are the implications for Southern Africa, given that the first two are more long-standing in terms of your funding? Will you have to shrink? Are you going to make any other adaptations, recalibrate the way in which you operate?
Well, no, we actually hope to grow and expand. Some of you may not know, but the Kellogg Foundation is in a growth cycle right now. And so when we think about our international work, our work is always based on what we call leverage and beginning to bring in other resources because we've been so committed to a space and we have the data and the KPIs to show that the impact has been achieved, and that allows us to do co-funding, to partner with business. You know, going back to Haiti, one of our major partners in our leverage strategy was Digicel, a company that also wanted to see the recovery of that country and its people. And so those kind of conversations happen where we're able to leverage resources beyond our own because of the trust and the data and the impact that we're making on the ground. And so no, I don't see us retracting at all. I just see continued expansion and partnerships.
You see growth. I mean, very quickly, and we have a very short amount of time left, but I would quickly ask, partnerships. You've both mentioned partnerships. How important are partnerships to you and why?
Excellent. We do everything through partnerships. So we are a commercial bank primarily, and we're focused on 6 clear segments. And I love hearing about the work you're doing in Haiti, Lejeune, because you know, our job is to help change makers do more. And so when you talk about projects like this, the real opportunity is to make those projects bankable as well, and figure out ways that you can layer into the capital stack, not only philanthropic capital, but also that you can think about the opportunities that banks and trust companies bring to it as well. We think that's the best. We think it's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's the answer, by the way, to solving the problem of government pulling out in a lot of places.
Yeah. Partnerships.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a good place for us to leave it. Thank you
you
so much for your
Thank
time,
you.
Priscilla and Lejeune.
Thank you.
Thank you. After you.
Thank you for attending today's live journalism, and to our partner Citadel Securities. We hope to see you again tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. here at the Conrad.